Hello, everybody. Welcome to the TechRaptor podcast. I'm Robert Scarpanito, your features editor.
My name is Andrew Stretch, Senior Content Manager.
I'm William Worrell, staff writer and horror aficionado.
Yeah, we brought Will back again from the dead.
Ooh, spooky.
To talk about horror games, because I mean, here's the thought process. Yesterday, at the time of recording, was Friday the 13th. By the time you're hearing this, it's Monday the 16th. Yeah, you know, that's just the way it goes.
Monday the 16th can be spooky as well. We'll agree it.
It's October, it's fine.
Yeah, the entire month is spooky. And you know what the spookiest thing is? I think this is maybe the first episode where, Stretch, you've had to say your actual title.
I thought because I'm not going to be the one giving my title last, that it might be weirdest to actually give my title.
Sounds like a you kind of choice.
And I definitely felt like that tingle up my spine, you know, a little bit of that spooky energy.
Something's wrong in the world.
So for this week, we're gonna do kind of another draft where we're gonna draft our personal, like our picks for horror games. You know, maybe they're the best, maybe they're ones that we want to talk about. You know, there's just, I think the reasoning is gonna be maybe a little different for all three of us, and we'll get into that as the show goes on. But it's gonna be a draft in the same way that we've done a previous draft episode, where Stretch is gonna go first. He gets first pick, then I get the next pick, and then Will gets two picks. I get a pick. Stretch gets two picks, etc. Right? So I think we can just get started and do our our list of threes. So, Stretch, horror game, what is yours?
So I've kind of, it's not like the way that I've approached my list has not been like scariest to least scary. All of them are very unique in their own way, but very top of my list for all that it does to not just be like a good game and spooky, but also to fuck with the player. Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem. For, if people are listening and are not aware of Eternal Darkness, this is a GameCube game. I think it was only on the GameCube.
It was.
Yeah.
But it was a game that would mess with the player by doing stuff like lowering the game audio, or your character would start like randomly sinking into the floor, and it would all be tied to the sanity mechanic in game. So the worse you were at the game, the more it would mess with you. But going back and playing it now, all of the ways that it messes with you are so dated. Like, it might screw with you that like it's changing input on you or it's muting, but instead of just like the audio cutting out, it's got like the giant green mute letters in the top left of the screen, like old CRTs would have.
Yeah, the UI it had, right? It brought up like things that an old TV, well, not old, but like 90s, early 2000s TV.
CRT.
Right?
It's old.
Yeah.
Mostly CRT.
Yeah, it is retro, I guess, right?
I mean,
unfortunately,
like Pokemon X and Y just had their 10th anniversary. Like, retro is like early 3DS nowadays.
Depending on who you ask, but it's not a conversation you want to start, trust me.
Right. No, the 80s was only 20 years ago, right?
Forever. Forever.
Yeah, so that's my start off. Eternal Darkness, because I love the idea of a like, it's not the spookiest game. It's GameCube graphics. It's not the scariest thing in the world to look at. But I love a game that like reaches through the screen and tries to fuck with you, the player.
I guess
Stunning opening pick. Opening pick.
I was not expecting an Eternal Darkness, but I will take an Eternal Darkness. I'll take, take a shot if you expected someone to say Resident Evil on this pod. I will take Resident Evil 7 as my pick. I think that's the one where, for me, it's, I mean, everyone knows Resident Evil 4 is the best, 10 out of 10, so yada yada, right? But I think 7 is the one that's like that perfect mix of like, it is legitimately pretty fucking spooky your first time going through that game with a claustrophobic first person view, fucking Jack just like never dying, and his footsteps, right? It brings back the Resident Evil 2 energy to it. So I don't know, it's I think that right mix of like, it's a modern Resident Evil game that is fun, and by the end of it you are kind of an action hero, just like Leon, right? But the beginnings of it pretty legitimately spooky. Like the second house you go through, that's pretty fucked too, right? It's not the scariest moments. Like there's definitely scarier moments in other Resident Evil games, but I think like as an overall vibes, if you take like the median average, I think 7 is that right balance of like spooky and fun.
7 did such a good job of like announcing to the world that like Resident Evil is back as well, and that really kicked off a lot of this incredible resurgence that Capcom has. Like Capcom is in a new golden age at the moment, and it was really Resident Evil 7 that kicked that off.
Yeah, I think 7 was such a strong entry point because as Scrappy said, it's got like the full package overall is really quite up there. It's not relying on like I think 4 obviously fantastic game. Played it a billion times because it's as great as it is. It kind of relies on the campiness. Like, because it threw itself into that a bit more, which is great and it really works for that game. But it's kind of nice having 7 be that sort of one where it's a little bit more applying to like more modern movie tropes, I guess, almost, of the way that sort of like the psychological stuff happens in the game as you get further and further into it.
Like I kind of see 4 as an action game with horror elements, where 7's a horror game with action elements. You know, I think it's just that's kind of where it is.
So did you have any difficulties in your mind weighing up whether you would go with Resident Evil 7 or Resident Evil 6 as your pick of a great horror game?
Hey, Stretch, we haven't gotten to my second pick. Don't spoil my second.
Oh, sorry. Man, that would be so funny if one of us came into this draft pick of like best horror games and it's just Resident Evil 1, 2, 3, 4.
It's just all Resi games.
I mean, we probably could do a pod that just like rank all the Resident Evil. Like there's more, like, you know, all the spin-offs and all the
do
main
not
line.
have a long enough podcast to do all of the Resident Evil games with those spin-offs. We'd be here for hours.
Yeah, but that's my pick. Will, you get your first and second pick here.
Cool, because we're doing sort of the snake draft.
Yeah, we're doing it back and forth.
My first pick, which is would probably surprise a lot of people who are familiar with the series because of the one I'm choosing. It's sort of a similar situation to you, Scrappy, with Resi 4 being the sort of like the one. In this instance, I'm going with Silent Hill, but specifically Silent Hill Downpour, which is post-Japanese development in the series, which would probably be like, you know, surprising to a lot of people. But I'll be honest with you, the reason that I chose Downpour over 2, which was my favorite horror game for like a long time anyway, was just because Downpour actually surprised me, and I ended up having it was really well done as a horror game, but because when it first came out, it was really rushed out, and it was only made this good via updates after the studio that had done it was like forcibly closed and stuff. And I feel like because of that fact, so many people never got to try it out, and it did a really good job of the thing that a lot of Silent Hill games struggled with since like 2 and 3 onwards has been enemy design is supposed to reflect the main character. The whole town is the big like antagonist of Silent Hill is the town, and most post 2, 3, you know, post American like development taken over, Western development I should say taken over because it wasn't all American. The studio who did Downpour were Polish, I think, or European anyway. Most of them struggled by having like they would pull elements that were popular, but without really understanding that they only worked because they were applied to the character from the game they're in. Pyramid Head is a big example. Doesn't appear in Downpour because the whole point he existed in 2 was because James Sunderland in it is like repressed in his sort of masculinity and finds his own masculinity scary. Big masculine monster attacking a lot of feminine monsters is that manifesting. But because it's fan favorite, it just gets reused. Everything I saw in Downpour was actually like applied to either of the 2 protagonists, because you only play as one character in the game, but there's a secondary protagonist who's kind of chasing you, and she's also the protagonist of the story that you learn through like secondary stuff, because there was lots of cuts. Again, it's not a perfect game, but it's my pick because it's just one of those ones that not enough people who are fans of that series have had a chance to play. Not helped by the fact that it's not on PC. It's only exclusive to the 360 and the PS3. So you really struggle to play them these days without emulating or owning an older system.
Yeah.
Is it on backwards compatible?
Maybe
I think
on Xbox.
On Xbox, yeah. I mean, it definitely is because I have Downpour right here, and I used to play it on my Series X. So,
yes, it is backwards compatible on the Xbox One and Series consoles, but disc only. Like you can't download it.
No, you can't download it.
You need to put the disc in, and then the disc will download it for you.
Also, I feel like I would like to throw in at the end of this selection briefly. Apologies for interrupting you there, Scrappy.
Yeah.
But just the big PSA to one who does end up playing Downpour, based on this or for any other reason, really. When you read online that if you get the secret ending, you can't get any of the other endings, that is no longer true. They have updated that. I was in a lot of emotional pain the day that I thought that was true, and then discovered 2 weeks later, oh no, I could have carried on playing and I would have been able to platinum it. So,
nice.
PSA, it's been fixed up.
I think I remember hearing you having that turmoil in the company Slack back in the day.
My desktop wallpaper is literally still a Downpour from that playthrough. Like, it's still Downpour related.
So support your local game shop. Pick up a disc of it.
Go
support your local game shop,
copy of
like
Downpour.
Best Buy.
Yeah, good point, actually, I guess.
Well, I mean, I guess here in Seattle we do have quite a few, so maybe I'm a little spoiled. In the
UK we have CEX, so like if you're in the UK you might be lucky as well, because that's where I got my copy from. Of course, the other problem is that they are getting more expensive now because they are trapped on those systems. So Konami, if you're listening, a re-release wouldn't go amiss. You're doing Metal Gear Solid, right? I mean, it's right there, bud. Come on.
Well, yeah, and they've also
support, please.
There's also that Silent Hill 2 remake coming out.
Yep, the Silent Hill 2 remake coming out. They already re-released for a couple of years back, because again I covered that for the site too.
And then there's that choose your own adventure ARG kind of thing happening at the end of the month.
Yeah, I mean that one's a bit more interesting, hasn't that? So there's been like preliminary episodes of that already going off, hasn't there?
Oh yeah,
I think so, because I know that people on the Reddit seem to have been talking about it and like judging it, and I was like, oh, I didn't know it was even available, but I might have missed something at some point.
That's a true gamer move. Let's judge something before it's even released.
I know, right? How the hell? I mean, I say how the hell, but we see it all the time.
Yeah.
We don't do it all the time, but we see it all the time.
Yeah, it's just everywhere on like Twitter and Reddit and everything, right?
It's kind of like the way the internet sort of encourages people to sort of like be with their opinions and stuff. It's just like straight in
jerk reactions
like,
first.
Cool. You guys take it's fine to take a 5-minute breather. It's okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, Downpour is my first choice anyway.
There you go. There's the Silent Hill Downpour, and now it's back to you again for your second.
I just want to. Everyone's first picks out. We've got a Resident Evil, a Silent Hill. I'm pretty proud that I went niche with my pick.
Yeah. I mean, I must admit, I was quite pleasantly surprised when you came out with.
I'm not the biggest horror aficionado. I used to get terrified playing Resident Evil Survivor on my PlayStation 1 back in the day.
I mean, I can't blame you. That is a terrible game.
So, second pick.
Oh right, yeah. Sorry, I forgot that it was me again. So hey, just to please you for your more niche. Actually, you know what? I'm going to swap my order a little bit, but I was going to go for this. I've changed my second, my third around. But my second pick is a game called Rule of Rose, which you may or may not have heard of. That's another pick that, although again, isn't like, it's not like some masterpiece of gameplay or whatever, but the storytelling, the atmosphere is really good. And again, so many people haven't had the opportunity to play this one because basically there was like a tabloid campaign against it in Italy in the early 2000s, and it was like banned from lots of places, despite the fact that this campaign from this tabloid was completely untrue. It's actually a relatively tame experience, if I'm honest with you, but like in a good and enjoyable kind of way. But yeah, it's a sort of Resident Evil clone where you're playing a girl in England in like the very early 1900s or late 1800s who is like, I think that a bus breaks down on the road. She ends up in an orphanage and then on an airship in the sky. It goes to some very weird places. But it's like a traditional Resident Evil style horror set on a flying airship, mostly staffed by monsters and small children. And it's a very unique experience.
Yeah, I'd never heard of that one. When did that come out?
Oh, was that like 2002-ish? It was during the sort of height of the PS2 era, basically. Let me just double check. Rule of Rose was 2000 and it was actually a bit later than that, 2006.
Gotcha.
So yeah, it was the weird release because of as I said, it got kind of ripped apart by a tabloid campaign, basically sort of similar to GTA. But with more of an impact.
What was the focus of the tabloid campaign?
Well, as I said previously, a lot of the characters are children, and nothing actually happens to like horrific to the kids in it. It's usually sort of like it's basically telling a lot of horror stories through the idea of interpersonal relationship problems between the kids. Like they're in an orphanage or a daycare, and it's like none of us like Sally, so we'll treat her like crap and bully her, and that will reflect some sort of horrific circumstance on the ship that you, the adult main character, deals with. But there was a lot of overblown stuff about having to attack a kid, or you had to like do something horrible happen to children. You saw them beaten or some shit. That this tabloid got from somewhere, and it just wasn't true. It's not. Nothing happens to the kids in the game for the most part. Nothing, especially not on camera anyway. I mean, it's got its horror moments, but it was really quite tame stuff. But I think there was a lot, especially at the time, there was a lot of sort of reactions to that kind of thing when we were getting a lot of Japanese horror tropes coming over, because again, it's a Japanese developed game. But this happened with, I think, was it Silent Hill 2 or 3, there were some enemies that were supposed to be like disembodied like children. But in the original version, you could see that they were really like evil little kids or whatever, and in the Western version they were like made either invisible or like harder to see or whatever, so that it was obscuring the fact they were supposed to be kids, because they're a bit more like sensitive about that sort of stuff because of stuff like this rule of rose situation and so on and stuff. So
I like the idea of like, oh, we don't want to insinuate like violence between children or violence against children, yada yada. But Bully from Rockstar Games came out the same year.
Yeah, but that's okay because it's Rockstar. They can get it's satire.
GTA children.
The thing is that
satire,
didn't that also develop like a lot of, for that exact reason, that had a big controversy in the UK again as well. Bully did.
Oh, in the UK it did.
Yeah, dude. I mean, was it limited to the UK? I don't know. I know there was, because there was like concern that like kids would learn to do stuff like attack each other like that or whatever, which is stupid because like what marbles and like slingshots like it's the fucking 50s, my guy. That's fine. Like that would be better than what they do today.
It's true. And I guess was it only just a few years later, right, that like BioShock came out, and in that you can like literally eat children, like, well, not eat, but
I mean, you absorb them. Sure, like it's not good.
Yeah, it's not great.
I think it's just whether the people who do the knee-jerk reactions are paying attention that day. Basically, it's like if they were sort of like sleeping on BioShock, it was because they were like, oh, whatever, it's fine.
Yeah.
No one brought up the fact that there were like little girls that you could like inject or whatever with weird plasmid science.
Yeah, but there's a lot of that game that was kind of fucked if you look back and think on it. Yeah.
I think it was sort of the point, right? Like though, the things like in lots of these contexts, it's a piece of artistic work where it's like, it's kind of the point is that you've taken that something so innocent has been so horribly corrupted by this awful place. That's the thing. So when people go like, it shouldn't be allowed, I'm like, well, then you just can't tell those stories anymore.
I get that, yeah.
Weirdly.
So your second pick was Rule of Roses, right?
It was Rule of Rose, but yes.
Rule of Rose, yes.
Weird pluralization because of Japanese translation, I'm assuming.
Right. So Rule of Rose. So then that brings it back to me. I think for my second pick, I'm gonna go with Dead by Daylight. Okay, I'm bringing in the social aspect here because I think for me, I'm not the biggest there's like Outlast Soma and all those kinds of games. I don't really play them too often. But to me, the whole vibe of like get in a game with your friends and have some fun, because it's an old adage that like if you play any game with friends, it's more fun, right? But with Dead by Daylight, I think it's like that perfect mix of the horror comes from players. There's no built-in like the spooky monster around the corner. Like if that happens, it's because someone is legitimately trying to scare you. Yeah, someone's being the monster, and like. I think I haven't had as much fun with a horror game than that. And it's weird because like it doesn't feel like a horror game in the same way like a Resident Evil does, right? But it's more that it's like that giddy, funny kind of horror, where it's like you're giggling, but also like a little bit scared, but not
like nervous laughter.
Yeah. You're not terrified, but you are a little bit spooked. Like whenever like the monster is like the totally not Jason character, right? And you start hearing the music and it's like, oh shit, oh no, they're watching me, right? And it's like they have all these mechanics like where the monster can stalk you and what it's like when they're watching you, and you can see their like that cone of vision that they have when they're chasing you right behind you. It's like it just does all these little things that really I think nails that multiplayer horror or asymmetrical multiplayer horror aspect,
They do such a good job gamifying mechanics to heighten the spookiness as well, like talking about the cone, but also like that when the killer's nearby, like you can really like hear the throbbing of the heartbeat kind of thing. That's just like such a good way to give a very positive game experience, and then that forces the players to be listening, to notice like, oh shit, like whatever I'm doing, I should stop and be quiet for a bit, because like I can feel the tension of this guy showing up, and that helps crescendo into like he's come around the corner, jump scare, or like when the witch has like the pop-up things.
Yeah. So I think it's actually Scrap says like part of the reason that works as well as it does is because it's like it's another person doing it to you too. It's like it's like kind of the difference between like sort of God of War style pre-scripted QTEs and like the weird stuff that can just happen in a game like Just Cause 3, because it's kind of you're given natural tools to sort of make cool stuff like that happen rather than having it sort of forced upon you. Also, they just do licensing really great. It's fun seeing so many different characters from different horror franchises show up.
Yeah, or like even like you get to play as Nicolas Cage, like if you're one of the survivors, right? Like that's just a thing now. That's amazing. Like they're definitely leaning into like it's the closest thing the horror space has to Fortnite, which is I think a good, genuinely legitimately think that's a good thing. It's funny but also pretty good. But just I think that base core gameplay mechanics, like honestly, if you've never played Dead by Daylight, hop on it with some friends if you're in a spooky mood, especially it's Halloween, right? Like Halloween's coming up soon. Perfect. It's a great vibe, very easy to get to, very like accessible. Like I think even your friends who aren't super into video games, like there's no hard like pro gamer moves you have to do here. Like the hardest thing is a QTE, like while you're like fixing generators or something, right? Like and it's pretty easy for people to get like, oh, press the button in time, right?
Yeah.
Dead by Daylight, that's my second pick. Stretch, you get your second and your third pick.
Yeah. So for my second pick, moving away from kind of like the zombies and the ghosts and the blood and guts and stuff.
Oh, wait. I just realized. No. Will, it's your third, right? No. Never mind. Yeah, no, you go last.
We're going backwards.
Yeah, sorry. My brain. Yes.
For my second pick, I'm going to go with Alien Isolation, because that is a terrifying game. Just in, not because you're constantly seeing blood and guts that you've got to react to jump scares, but it's just so fucking tense. I admittedly did not even finish this game. Like after you're kind of when you're, I think I was like on the bridge or something, and then there's just the androids everywhere, and the way that they'll just like creep up behind you, grab you, and then suddenly your entire screen is just filled up with their faces. I also played this game on my Xbox One with the Kinect.
Yeah.
It had two really cool features. One of them was the lean. You'd hold down the lean button and then you could just slightly tilt your head in real life and it would peek out. But then you could also have it so that it would track ambient noise in the room you're playing in as well. So
that feature was insane.
It was very fun, especially like playing it in college and stuff. To have like a bunch of people all like attempting to be quiet, but then like, when the alien drops down or an android like appears and crosses the path as people like, and then like there'd be a noticeable reaction in the game. That was a blast. Terrifying game.
And I remember hearing too, doesn't the alien in that game have like a weird AI where it's kind of like unpredictable and like the ways it can find you, right?
I believe so. It was meant to have some kind of like adaptive learning thing going on.
Yeah, I think it was an optional feature, kind of like the audio and the other stuff. I think you could turn it on and off, but it would kind of like ramp upwards. I think it's basically if you were struggling with the game, it would become stupider if you were like getting too good and weren't getting scared very often. It'd be like, okay, we need to make this worse. Effectively, it's kind of like the director from like the Left 4 Dead games, I guess, would be a good way of sort of like comparing it to.
Yeah, because that's one I haven't played, but I always hear stories of like it's one of the fucking scarier like
It's so tense.
As you said, it's so tense that it's kind of difficult. It can, if you're not into tense games, it can be difficult to play. I have to play it like 20 minutes at a time to like an hour at a time, and I'm super into horror games too. So like I did Outlast in one go, but I cannot do that with Alien Isolation. I have to take breaks.
You finish a session of Alien Isolation and like sit back, and you can like let your shoulders relax, and it's like, oh, I have been like locked in up to here for a whole hour, tight,
without
tense.
noticing.
Yeah, and you just don't notice, and it hurts.
Yeah, that's a pretty good pick for you. So number 3, we're capping yours off.
Yeah, so this is going to be my last one. My last one is going to be Emily Wants to Play VR. So this is it's like a very Five Nights-esque game that you're a pizza guy who gets pulled into a house at midnight, and then, there are different like stuffed toys that, like, as different hours progress, become more active, and each of the different toys you need to react differently to get them away from you. But being VR, you've got like the house to explore, like doors will swing open and shut in this house. You'll need to collect like batteries for your flashlight. But it's just, the idea of you've already got the spookiness of the house, but then like if you hear the girls giggle, you need to find her and look at her, because only looking at her will stop her. Then there's like a red light, green light. I think it was a clown that, you hear like him like muttering to himself, and you just need to freeze, and you weren't allowed to move until he disappears again. But then you'd have like really tense situations where you like have just turned on the lights. You'll hear the clown that tells you that you're not allowed to move, and then you hear the girl giggle, and so you're now like there frozen, maybe in pitch darkness, and you've now got to worry about this little girl creepily like scampering up to you, and then all of the jump scares are like full in helmet, terrifying.
Hey, I've got one word. No. Nope.
I mean, I didn't even know they'd VR'd that game. I've heard or I've like seen videos of people playing that one, but I did not know they'd VR'd it up.
Yeah, they're terrifying.
Yeah. My only experience with horror VR is I played a little bit of Resident Evil Village when they did that VR update, like on PSVR 2, and I didn't jive with it as much because it had like really narrow FOV and like the usual VR-ness of it. But I got as far as like if you played Village, there's that part in the beginning where like you're being taken away by the military, and then it like crashes, and then you have to walk through the woods, and it's dark as shit, right? And playing it non-VR, I was like, whatever, it's dark woods. In VR, can't be fucked. I can't be bothered, cannot be asked to keep walking down the woods. And I can't even fucking imagine going through a house where you have to look at a giggling little girl while a clown's telling you to not look, to not move. I don't even want to think about that.
VR does take it up by like 20 notches, right? Like,
yeah. As soon as you're in there, like, with the headphones on, with the 3D, it's terrifying. It's insane.
Because it just puts you in there. Yeah. Yeah.
It's too immersive.
It's making me think about, though, like VR is maybe like as VR gets more and more consumer grade, I feel like that's been a 10-year long conversation, right? Of like, when is VR going to be ready? I feel like horror is really going to fucking blossom when with VR.
100%. I mean, I think just the fact that you've got like the immersion factor that increases when you use VR alone is like a huge buff to that. Like, I have reviewed a bunch of VR horror games that I also got to play like outside of VR, and they were just like, outside of VR, it's like, whatever. This is just I'm sneaking around some house. Intruders, I think it was called. I don't remember now. And it was just like sort of whatever. It's like a first person sneaky. Oh, it's dark and there are people in my house sort of game. Is nothing. And then you put it on VR and it's like, I am 6 again and these are people in my house, please save me.
Yeah.
And I mean, look, even non-scary VR games can scare you. If you ever want to avoid a bad VR experience, don't get drunk and then play like chapter 4 or 5 of the American Dream. I was not ready.
I
I don't
feel
even
like
know what the American Dream is.
me neither, but I feel like the answer is don't get drunk and play VR, right? I feel like
okay, yeah, that's
not a good...
probably the flat advice. For real though, if you have VR and you have not played the American Dream, I highly recommend it. It's what's it, that game Screen Watch, where it's like a 4-player shooter where you can only see what you're doing on other people's screens.
Yeah,
it's like Sumo Digital. I can't remember. Samurai Punk, actually, I think is the developer. They're like an Australian dev team and stuff, and they did basically it's kind of like a fake theme park attraction set in the 40s, 50s of like American kind of Americana. So that era that Americana harkens back to strongly of like the nuclear family and sort of like the 50s era of sort of like vibe of like, come on Billy, I'm going to throw the ball and stuff. It's kind of a big parody of that, where you spend your entire life doing everything with guns. But one of the like that's the joke, right? It's like you're a baby, you're eating your food out of a bowl that your mum's holding for you by using a gun and putting the gun in your mouth to eat the food, and then you like have to shoot the ball back to your dad, and later on when he's throwing catch, you have to like shoot the ball. It's just you go through your entire life through like having your own kids, marrying, but it just gets progressively more and more insane. And there's one particular chapter where you go on a date with your high school sweetheart at an Italian restaurant where things get dark out of fucking nowhere, and it really did me in like when I did it. So I recommend, but be prepared.
Right, and it wasn't the whiskey that did you in for sure. Nope.
I mean, it could be both. It could be both.
Fair.
I think it's so easy to get into like horror movies and horror TV shows. We were talking beforehand. The Fall of the House of Usher just started, and like that's a great psychological horror thing. Or a whole bunch of people at TechRaptor have been doing like horror movie rewatches. But there's like watching a horror movie and playing a horror video game. The horror video game can be less scary. On the surface, it can be less scary, but because you're doing it, it makes it so much more tense immediately. Then that VR step is just one layer deeper. That you could be someone who is so fine with horror, like could watch any horror movie and be unfazed, and you will still be a complete bitch when you're put into a headset with 3D audio.
I wonder how much of that is, and maybe this is me coming from like a more naive VR experience. Like I'm not as VR, like I haven't played as much VR as some people have, but I think when you have your hands on the controller and you're playing a video game, a non-VR video game, like I think I've played enough video games where I think like I know how they work on a functional mechanical level, so like whenever a jump scare happens, my brain is like, oh, it's because I stepped into the active zone that triggers the game code to be like, yes, now do the loud noise and the visuals, right? But with VR, I feel like I haven't built up the muscle memory or the language of understanding yet where I think of them in that way. So kind of feels it's more novel, right? And it's more surprising in many ways, which I think works to like horror's advantage, because the whole point is it wants to surprise you and scare you, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it kind of just skips that step in the brain, like where like as you said, you kind of think about the terms when you're in like a normal video game. It's like, oh, I've stepped into like I've triggered a flag, and I know or whatever. That like when you're in VR, that like skip to having it be the as you look around, the world around you changes like it does in real life. Kind of skips that step in your brain where you're thinking, oh, this is doing this, which is doing this, which is doing this, and it's just like this is real. Run. I think it kind of almost makes it more primal. It's like you can kinesthetically project yourself using a controller in a normal video game into a horror scenario, and it's like still scary. But when you're in VR, you don't have a choice. You like have to just make that leap immediately because you've got the machine on your head and your hands on the sort of like, I don't know, VR controllers or whatever. But
exactly,
I definitely think that's part of it.
So Emily wants to play VR. That is your third pick, and I think it just spawned a little conversation about VR horror in general, which has been pretty great. Okay, so I'm like flipping a coin between like two for my last pick.
Okay, well, I'll say now I've already got some like honorable mentions that I'll want to bring up in discussion later. So just because you need to do a coin flip doesn't mean that we can't talk about them later.
Fair. Okay. I'm gonna say Dead Space remake for my third pick,
Ooh.
which I know is just Resident Evil 4 in space.
Amazing.
No, it's a lot more than that, but I think there was something really novel about it when it first came out. You know, like what, over 10 years ago now, right? It was like 2008 or 9, I think, when the original came out.
2008, I think.
Yeah, where, because before then it was like go for the head, right? It's pretty basic, shooter stuff. But Dead Space is like, no, cut off, go for the limbs, dismember these things. Like be a surgeon
With your foot.
Yeah.
Specifically, stomp on it until it comes away.
Hey, I still stomp on every corpse I find because I'm like, I know you're gonna come back. I'm gonna.
Pretty sure they expect you to do that at a certain point. It's just like, no, I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah.
Crush them.
But I think just while we were talking about like, like the novelty kind of helps ramp up the horror. I think when I first played through Dead Space, there was that novelty of like, go for the arms, go for the legs, where like you're learning a whole new way to really like quote unquote effectively defeat enemies with a gun, right? And that coupled with, these things look pretty weird and scary, and they're jumping at you from every angle, and it's like dark half the time, and etc. Like, I think there was just a lot going on in Dead Space that just came together and worked so well for it. And then the remake, I think, just like cranks everything up to 11, right? Like it kind of redoes some of the parts that were a little weaker in the original, right? And then it looks amazing. It's beautiful, right? The lighting is fantastic in it, which really helps sell like, dude, this is fucked. A lot of this is absolutely fucked. I don't know. There's like a certain magic to, I think, Dead Space, where it's like the closest I felt to like a third person like Resident Evil clone kind of a vibe, but it definitely takes that formula and spins it and runs on its own. The franchise itself maybe ran into a wall, but Dead Space 1
or several walls.
Dead Space 1 at least was like, it's just front to back fantastic experience for a horror game.
It's also great not just having the idea of shoot the limbs, not the head, but for them to create a weapon that is so satisfying and so unique, to have the idea of the horizontal and the vertical shot specifically for cutting limbs. And it is just so satisfying to have a necromorph coming at you and you just like clean take out both of its legs. Yep. And like it keeps coming, but it's just a satisfying, fantastic game. Even the original.
Yeah, 100%.
Like,
I mean, they made like, it's not just the plasma cutter, right? Like a lot of the weapons that they like the rip, what's it called? The rip something where you shoot like a fucking the rip where you shoot like a saw blade or several saw blades that kind of hang in the air and was it the line gun, which is like the shotgun version of a plasma cutter?
Yeah, the line gun always felt so that to me is like the perfect like clean take out both legs. Like it's so fun to use that.
Aim for the knees, boys.
I know that we've talked about it before on the podcast when the Dead Space remake came out, but to anyone listening who has not seen it, the animated Dead Space prequel movie done by this, like, it's got the same art style as the old Men in Black cartoons. And it's all about what happens when the marker first gets put on the Ishimura, and kind of, everything being like, everything makes sense. Everything is a normal, mining rig, ship, whatever. And then just the descent into chaos as like everyone was getting transformed into necromorphs and stuff. Fantastic movie. Last time I checked, it was free to watch on YouTube as like an official free to watch on YouTube, not like just piracy. It's good. That's a good, fun horror watch.
So I might have to check that one out because I'm a bit on the back foot for once when it comes to this one. Dead Space 1 is like one of my top 5 horror games. It's luckily wasn't going to appear on the list, so I forgot about it, which is not great.
Wow.
But well, it's because so the remake, as you know, came out like a little while ago. I've owned it since around the time it came out, and I still haven't played it because I'm like 2 Chiefs off of the platinum for the damn thing. So like for the original, like I've just finished the super hard mode playthrough. I've finished the playthrough where you just use a plasma cutter the entire game, and it's just like the last 2 or 3 like upgrades or whatever to finish it off. And I'm like, I don't. So I've not even played the remake yet. I don't want to start playing it until I finished off the last things on the original. So.
I hope you know that the remake also has the one gun run thing. Like only
I'm planning on doing it immediately as soon as I get into this one. I might even do a normal run first. I'm just going to do a 1 gun run.
That's real, especially when so much of the game is like inventory management and like having that, and also like the limited number of power nodes to upgrade. The
So
getting
much easier.
like the default gun that you get at the start of the game is the best gun. Like you can if you upgrade it, you don't need to worry about inventory space. You can blitz through the game with it.
It literally makes those platinum runs so fun because it's like, you know, you just got one gun to worry about upgrading, but on top of that, it's just fun to fucking use still. It's like take out a few limbs, take out like the joints, and, you know, use the sort of rotating firing mode and stuff. And it's just like you can get through a whole game like that and it still feels great to play.
Yeah, I will say I do think with the remake, I mean, yeah, most of my nodes went to the plasma cutter, but with the remake, I do think there were some they tweaked some of the weapons and they feel like better than the original from what I remember of my time with it like years ago. Like the force gun, dude, that thing feels dead ass like a shotgun. That's just like like if you get point blank, you just blow all the limbs off of the thing like right in front. It feels so satisfying to do that. So there are other reasons to use other guns. But the plasma cutter is still like great.
Plasma cutter is king.
Yeah, it really is. All right, Will, final to round us off. After this, all the other horror games are bad. These 9 are the only ones worth playing, right? That's
fuck. I'm gonna feel bad for picking this one now. Well, you know what? At least I didn't pick ODT in the end. That was on my short list, so we'll talk about why that didn't make the cut later, eh? So yeah, my third and final pick is the niche one. It's a PS1 game by a small, I think, British studio called Martian Gothic Reunification.
No, that's not a real video game name.
Yeah, well, you know, it's strange, but it is a real name. You can tell they're British. Maybe if I'm correct about that. If I'm not, then never mind. The studio, I can't remember the name of the studio who made this thing, but it's like again, it's kind of like during the height of the Resi and Silent Hill sort of survival horror style thing on the PS1. But it was a really interesting game because you played as 3 characters who were sent to a space station, kind of like you are in Dead Space. Although that's not a station, right? That's just a big ship. But you're sent to a big thing in space. You're all put in different airlocks, and you control all 3 of them. But if any of the 2 of these 3 characters meet up, they body horror into each other, and you get a game over. So that's why it's called reunification, is some weird space ray or whatever happens. So you have to like be really conscious about where all 3 of the characters are throughout the entire game. Otherwise, you'll accidentally walk into the same corridor, and once the rooms are like the camera shifts to the same room, like you know how camera shifts happen in old Resi games. If that happens and you happen to be using the same camera, both characters will like, well, I'll say they body horror into each other, but with PS1 graphics. It may not be the scariest thing in the universe now, but it's also just like a really, really interesting horror gameplay mechanic. This idea that you could, you know, you'd have these 2 characters walking around and you've got to like manage inventories, and like if you need to swap items between 2 of them, it's like I have to send one to a place, put the thing in there, and avoid all these obstacles. And it made it really like tense and interesting, but also I think the reason it made it not do so well is because it does add a bit of like you're kind of backtracking over yourself a little bit because you have to like move people out of the way, and it's kind of fiddly. But you know, if you're looking for hidden PS1 sort of horror gems, it's one of the few ones that people just don't talk about that much.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like almost a puzzle game by way of horror, right?
Yeah, I'd say for sure there's definitely a lot of kind of those kind of mechanics in it, because it's effectively figuring out how you can solve puzzles that require these 3 different skill sets, like the Lost Vikings or whatever, but without them ever meeting each other. Right. So it's like it is a really weird concept, and it was kind of a really small team too, which is part of the reason that I ended up picking it. Like they'd made one game before that was called Dreamweb, which is like a point and click game. And the next game they made was this PS1 game, and then they disappeared. And I don't even know what happened to them. I just know that this game was like really weird and kooky.
Yeah, that's definitely one I'd never like, because the name just sounds like, you know, they rolled a bunch of dice over a cherry and was like, let's pick 3 words. I
feel like with the reunification I got, but I feel like they just wanted to go with reunification or something, and whoever was pubbing was like, we need more than just reunification. You can't just call the whole last game that.
Yeah, so they're in space.
Martian Gothic, what's that for? It's horror. I mean, it's not Gothic horror though, is it? No, but we're just going to call it that anyway.
Yeah. It could be a little goth, you know?
I mean, they could have made it a bit goth, but it's mostly just like tech horror because it's on a spaceship, so. And it's not like a Geiger thing either, so you can't even make that claim that it's like Geiger-esque in some way.
Martian Geiger reunification.
Oh my god, Martian Geiger. So that should be a series.
Yeah.
I feel like that should be a series of horror games.
I think that was just Scorn, wasn't it?
I mean, yeah, kind of.
Yeah. That didn't make the list, huh?
No.
Neither
It's
did
a real
Agony,
shame.
but there are reasons
I
why
finished
certain
that game, and it's got such a weird ending. I had to like.
Wait,
and
Scorn or Agony?
Scorn.
Oh god.
I finished it, and there wasn't even like a proper credits roll at the end, and I just kind of like the game just kind of like finishes with your character in some like long, slow kind of death thing. That
Spoilers?
not really.
I
I
wouldn't
don't
worry
know.
about it. I don't think anyone's gonna play. I'm honestly surprised you played it all the way to the end stretch. I couldn't. I just got so hacked. I was like, nah, this is not worth it anymore, man.
I was
sucks.
reviewing it, so I needed to
Oh,
finish
okay.
it.
You were legally
That makes
contractually
sense.
obligated to finish it.
But I did email their PR back to say, hey, just want to make sure that I haven't like gotten a game over. Is this the ending of the game? And yeah, that was it.
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay.
Good,
Sure.
good shit.
That was very
Yeah.
strange. It's
It is
very
not-
strange game.
Scorn was disappointing in many ways. It was not. It's anything that sort of like carries around the kind of Guy Gray aesthetic is going to draw heads because it's intentionally gross. It's sort of like Darkseid or whatever on the back in the DOS days. It's going to like turn heads. But then the problem with that game was that you just got into it and it just was really like incredibly clunky and obtuse and stuff with like everything. And you could also like soft lock yourself out of progress, I think, weirdly.
I don't think that ever happened to me.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's that easy to do. It's something to do with like the way respawns work, and if you tank a bunch of damage too early in a certain stage or whatever, it's like nearly impossible to. There's the crap combat with the little bugs and the arm machine or whatever. It's like that area is where it's apparently possible to get yourself completely trapped like forever or something, or at least it was. Whether they've updated it, I don't know.
That's very funny.
Well, this isn't really a list of like worst horror games, but I'm glad that Scorn got an opportunity to appear.
Air
on
some
this episode.
grievances.
Yeah.
If we're doing bad horror games, I've got some other targets on that I would like to like. No, I'm just joking. I'm going to do that. It'd be bad.
Yeah. What was your first pick? Like Silent Hill 2, hot takes. Let's go.
Oh, that's not a hot take. That's a I will be dead take. If I say the real bad take is that I don't think any of the FNAF games are good games.
See, that's funny because FNAF was going to be on one of my honorable mentions.
Not anymore.
You know what? No, dude, I'll tell you this. I actually don't mind the story. It's batshit, but the story's interesting. But that gameplay is just not fun. I just don't find it interesting or engaging anyway. And that's kind of a killer for a fucking game. And then when they did the one game where you can play it, what's the new one called? Security Breach. And then there's just, and I was like, hey, this is all right. And then I got to the bit with like there's a giant sun and moon thing, and it was like not overly scary, but just really annoying to like try and walk past this sun. It was like I would get to like the third thing I need to collect and miss it, and like I just go up. I can't. That's my hot take: is that none of the FNAF games have ever been that great. It's just that the lore that surrounds them is really, and the community that surrounds them is really interesting. That's the only reason it's as big as it is. IMO.
Fair.
But
well, I think let's rattle off our top threes in an order of draft. I think it'd be nice to like regroup on where we are at. So Stretch, what is your personal top 3 horror games here?
Sure thing. My personal top 3 horror games are Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem, Alien Isolation, and Emily Wants to Play, specifically the VR version.
And mine are Resident Evil 7, Dead by Daylight, and then Dead Space Remake. Definitely the kind of straight down the middle mainstream ones going on here.
And my ever so strange list is Silent Hill Downpour, followed by Rule of Rose and Martian Gothic Reunification. At least people have heard of one of those 3 games.
Yeah, Rule of Rose, right?
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah,
that's the one.
Yeah,
So
so
I even got leaked outside of. I just realised I'm not sure if it's even available in North America at all.
I don't know, maybe.
I'll have to check.
Yeah, but that's our lists here. And Stretch, you said you had some honorable mentions you wanted to go through, right? FNAF being one of them.
FNAF was one of them. The other one, kind of in a similar vein, was Doki Doki Literature Club. Just another one of that, like where the game is reaching out to the player and specifically fucking with them. And then another just genre of horror, like a subgenre of horror gaming that got kicked off with Until Dawn. And all of like the dark pictures and the quarry and stuff. While in terms of horror, none of them are over the top fantastic. The idea of like getting friends together, whenever one of these games comes out, I always, get a bunch of friends over. We do the movie night mode where everyone gets their own character and they put their name in, and then it's pick your own horror adventure, but everyone gets to sit around and be part of the experience. And
Right.
for like horror movies are already such a good thing to watch with friends. Like that undercurrent of like comedy and making fun of a horror movie as a way to deflect from it scaring you is so important. For Until Dawn and like the later games, like all of the Man of Medan and stuff, for that to create such a good like horror movie feel for a video game is an absolute blast.
Yeah. I think it's kind of like one of the reasons I picked like Dead by Daylight, right? Is that bringing friends into it, like, and having a shared horror experience. I think there's something kind of magical about it. Even if it's potentially not as scary as like you're alone in a dark room playing Alien Isolation with a Kinect, like, right? It's a different kind of horror, but I think it's a fun vibe for sure.
I think that's the thing is like, people kind of traditionally make the assumption that when you're going into a horror movie, you're like, or to anything horror related, that you're going in for scares. But, I mean, reducing how scary something is doesn't necessarily reduce your enjoyment of it. It's like when you go back and watch an old slasher film from the 80s or whatever these days, they're not really that scary. It was just kind of like, it's all shock value and grossness, and that's what makes them kind of fun to do with other people. And I get that. There's those similar kind of vibes from stuff like Dead by Daylight and like, and as you said, the sort of Dark Pictures anthology series and what's the Until Dawn, right? The sort of, again, the sort of choose your own adventure of a slasher movie. Yeah. It's like those things that totally fits into that same feeling of like, you've brought all of your friends around to chat crap about this horror movie, or like in the case of Dead by Daylight, Steve's chasing me around the woods with a like pickaxe for 7 hours or whatever, because like it's just it's your mate, but they are also like Leatherface at that point. So it makes it fun in a way.
Or even if it's a stranger online, that's like almost even better, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the devil you don't know.
So the other game I was debating for my third pick was PT, which, that I feel like PT is like kind of meta in that it's like kind of lost media now. Like we're kind of getting to that point where some people are like, what the fuck's PT? Like, because you can't play it, you can't buy it, you can't download it, like unless you buy a $1,000 PS4 on eBay, right, to play PT.
But I know that people have found ways to mod PS5s to update the whitelist to allow you to install and run it. So at this point, like PT is going to get some resurgence as soon as like PS4 emulation is reliably cracked.
Like, I was about to say, emulation is how it will survive. Didn't someone like remake PT in Unreal Engine anyway? Isn't that like a thing already? I'm sure
I think someone's been trying to. I don't remember if that was like fully done yet. But PT is just one of the, like, to me, PT is like, we were talking earlier about, when we're playing non-VR horror games, it's kind of easy to see like, oh, this is the flag, this is the active zone, this is like where you think of it mechanically instead of, emotionally, right? I think PT is the closest where it's like, yeah, we know you think of these things mechanically, and we're gonna fuck with you because you were thinking of it mechanically, and I think it's a very Kojima thing to do, right?
I mean, and it's kind of the meta like duo, right? Is like you've got sort of this Guillermo del Toro worked with them on that one, right, on PT.
Yeah,
so I feel like getting both of them in a room to do weird meta kind of mini referential stuff definitely is why it ended up the weird kind of way it did.
Yeah,
it's like so much of horror games attempted to become PT. We had Allison Road or whatever that one was called. There was that one, but I think you nailed it with your first pick. Resident Evil 7 has really been the only game that has taken that and run with it. I feel like, while PT was a canceled Silent Hills, ironically it was Resident Evil that picked up that gameplay and said, oh, everyone seems to really be liking this. What if we just did that and put that in instead of figuring out how to follow up from Resident Evil 6?
Yeah. I mean, and if you that just reminded me, like Resident Evil 7's demo campaign, that was super fucking smart because like the
It
demo kept
really
getting
was.
updates, right? And like it was a mystery, but also spooky, right?
It
And
kept everyone really coming back because it's just the demo, from what I remember, is literally like what a camera crew going in before, and they're like the videotapes that you find in the main campaign is like
yeah,
this camera crew that went in, and in the demo you play as the camera crew, and it really sold it because everyone was sort of like, oh, PT, and it's like it's been cancelled, man, that sucks. And the Capcom were like, well, actually, we have something akin to PT right here. Would you perhaps like to give it a go? And
it was
just
like
it
that
was like
perfect.
timing and like marketing was just spot on for it.
100%. And then another game I was tossing around and led myself to like not pick it. Inscription. I think the first act, if it was just the first act, it might make it on my list because it's like that right horror vibe. It's very spooky, but it's a fun little card game too, with that interesting like when you die and start over mechanic, and that whole vibe is like where your previous character becomes a character your future characters can play as. Like that's all very macabre in a way. But I didn't quite jive with when it transitioned into Act 2 and beyond. So I was like, well, I can't really speak to the full experience of Inscription. So I felt like I couldn't really put it on my list, but that's where I'm at with
Understandable.
it. Horror games love a good ARG.
Yeah. Will, did you have any honorable mentions you wanted to?
Well, there's the one that was kind of an outlier. I mean, I've really picked this list as just when I picked my list, I was kind of going for stuff that I just thought was the most interesting in terms of horror. And there was one that I, for similar reasons to you, Scrappy, didn't want to put in because I never actually finished it. So I don't feel like I have a good enough grasp on it to have brought it up. But it was a game called ODT. You can get it on PC now, on Steam. It was like re-released or whatever, not even that long ago. It's ODT or Die Trying. It's about a bunch of people who like crash land on some weird planet, and it's just try and escape. And I think that like it was kind of one of those really generic titles, but because of the weird, and by generic title I mean as in the game was kind of generic, but the title being this weird ODT or Die Trying, also that was like a really odd title. And I do sort of, the reason it never ended up on the list was that I was kind of concerned that like the only reason that I thought it was as good as it was that I played, this was kind of a horror-esque game that I played when I was still absolutely like terrified, like couldn't play Tomb Raider 2 or 3 or anything because of the skeletons, kind of terrified. I was like a very young child at that point. And I was just like, I'd never grasped it. I only really replayed it again when they did the Steam re-release a few years back, and I haven't even finished that. So like that one just got left by the wayside purely because I didn't feel confident enough with it.
Right.
And beyond that, actually, there was one other one that was a consideration was another Silent Hill, which gets kind of like unfairly treated, I think, is the other option was Silent Hill Origins, which was the PSP, PS2 release where it's like a prequel. Right. And a lot of people didn't like it. It had like these destruction mechanics, so like you'd use weapons and then they'd break, and people hated that. I always thought that worked really well in the game because like you're beating up a monster, oh shit, the table leg I'm using has fallen apart, and it's like this mad scramble to get stuff. But it's also one of the only proper two worlds gameplay Silent Hill games. Because I know that this is the discussion we've had in the Slack before. I'm sure me and Stretch have talked about this a bunch. The two worlds gameplay technically is only two worlds gameplay if you have control over the transition. And Silent Hill Origins was the only one where it's like you can go between the other world and the normal world, like when you want to. Because it's like something to do with mirrors in the game. It's like I don't know. I'm sure it is explained. But yeah, that one nearly was like my choice over. Like if someone else had gone for some reason for Downpour, like that would have been my second Silent Hill choice for like kind of slept on games because it had its problems with like making. It's like we could only use Pyramid Head because it doesn't make sense. Let's make our own, and they called him the Butcher, and it was just kind of. It just felt like they were just doing Pyramid Head in all but name. Yeah, right. Well. Yes. But yeah, that would have been my only like other option would have been for Origins is that I feel it gets slept on a bit, but I also understand it does have some weird problems with like treading kind of boring old ground that the Silent Hill series was done with like 3 games before it, you know?
Right. See, I feel like Silent Hill is it's probably the big hole in my like mainstream horror game space. I've never played a Silent Hill, and Silent Hill 2 remake is probably going to be my first experience with the franchise. So
I hope it's as good as the original is, because it is. The original Silent Hill 2 is easily one of the best made horror experiences like of all time, in my opinion anyway. I mean, it got kind of overblown for a long time because it was so good, and kind of nothing else seemed to be able to top it after 2 came out. Like 3 was good, 4 was interesting but had a lot of issues, and then that's why like it went downhill from that point. But 2 was like, it was really good for in terms of actual psychological horror. So if I really do hope they the Bloober team do a decent job of this remake of 2, because it is a really interesting story, and I cannot wait to hear what you think of it, if I'm honest, because I think that I'll have a lot of fun with it because it takes you to some interesting places.
Hell yeah. Well, we'll see whenever that does come out, because I think right now it's like
soon.
Yeah,
it's not going to be soon, but soon.
Well, and I think also just to consider with this year, right? I mean, we've still got Alan Wake 2 is going to come out right before Halloween, which I could see that as potentially being like if we did this podcast a couple weeks after that came out, maybe that could even be on one of our lists, so definitely something to kind of keep in mind if you're a big horror person. That's just probably a big release that's probably already on your radar, I would think. But I think that's a good place for us to wrap this week's episode of the TechRaptor podcast. We hope you enjoyed, and maybe you've heard a few horror games that you might want to pick up potentially at your local game shop, because Will, you have some pretty off the wall disc-based picks.
Weird choices that you cannot play digitally. I am very, very sorry to everyone.
But we hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please feel free to leave us a review on whatever platform you're listening on. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, or a thumbs up, and let us know in the comments down below. What are some of your favorite horror games? What's like your top 3 picks that you would have picked if you were here on this podcast? Because we would love to see. We'd love to figure out what it is that our audience is really into. And if you
also
want
tell
more,
us who had the best trilogy in the comments too. Who had the best 3 picks?
Or who had the best trilogy? If you play one from the start to finish, which one has the most likely chance to be a story? A complete story, yeah.
Oops.
If you want more content from us, you can go to techraptor.net, where we're always publishing news, features, and reviews throughout the week. But if you want more of this show, we will be back in your feed next Monday, and we will see you then.